Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other iridescent co-host,
Brian. Hi.
Hi Brian, how are you?
Fine.
We have both worn very orange t-shirts this particular recording.
Oh, Joel, are we wearing this? Oh, we're not.
We're not actually, thankfully.
Oh, thank God.
Mine is a slightly more...
It's Heather.
It's Heathered. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a Heather.
Which is
Heather
an industry term.
It actually specifically is, yeah.
Okay, so we're here to talk about Buffy episode 19 of season 5, Tough Love and its associated themes and images. Brian, do you want to kick us off with a Buffy Ann summary?
Yeah, sure. So this episode was first aired on May the 1st. Wait, that doesn't sound right, does it? Doesn't feel like that. Was the last episode we watched released in April? Yeah, apparently it was. May the 1st, 2001. Next week's going to be Spiral. I always forget to talk about the next episode that we're going to be doing, but oh well. Okay. Here is your Buffy Ann summary, and then I'll tell you about who wrote it and shit. Willow and Tara quarrel. At a fair by herself, Tara is tortured and mind-sucked by Glory. After promising Buffy to do nothing rash, Willow does the darkest magic... Willow does darkest magic to fight Glory, on whom she inflicts serious pain before starting to lose. Warned by Spike, Buffy arrives in time to help her escape. Glory follows them. Tara inadvertently revealed that Dawn is the key. In fairness, they had a lot of plot. They had a lot of plot to cover in a short period of time there, but that was pretty hilarious. They started 35 minutes into the episode. They're like, "Oh,
all that stuff at the start was preamble, realistically." Yeah.
Dawn, Buffy, difficulty can get fucked.
Yeah.
And it was directed by David Grossman, who last directed Out of My Mind, and written by Rebecca Rand Kirshner, who last wrote Listening to Fear.
Mm-hmm, very good.
Yeah, apparently she has an interest in a certain theme.
Fear?
Insanity.
Ah, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so that's all that's happening here.
You know what's awful? Listening back to the podcast a lot recently.
You listen back to the podcast?
You pointed out recently that I say the word insane all the time as just oh, that's wild, you know? And I was like, oh God, that's kind of not great in terms of leaning on somewhat ableist language. And yeah, I was just feel bad about it, but it's a constant tick. But I'll work on it. I
think it's funny because I think it's a very sweet and sincere review, but you're concerned about this kind of potentially middle of the road or common phrase which does have ableist connotations, while we also very comfortably use much more horrible language.
Yeah, but the much more horrible language,
quote unquote ironically, yeah,
much more horrible language is usually
directed at us,
directed much more horrible people.
Internally.
Yeah.
So absolutely. So I think so definitely a lot of plot to get into in this episode of Buffy, but before we do so, for our court mandated Buffy Boys Bronze Banter segment, I was like, what's a synonym for a segment that starts with a B? Begment. We wanted to continue talking about our high octane
bifurcation.
No, not at all. Well, I suppose in far as the connotation of something which is separating into parts, but not as intended to be a section of a podcast. Okay, you want a synonym for segment with the letter B, and I got what you want, but actually it's not good enough, is what you're saying. Yeah, because it would be if you were gave me something that sounds similar to the word B, and you were like, what? I don't know where I'm going with this. Yeah, you started that sentence without you've kicked me right off my kill here. We want to talk about what we've been watching, as we often do. Continue, yeah. So we've been... Joe, you know what I forgot? We forgot when we were like, oh, we'll talk about this for the Bronze Banter. America... Remember during summer we were like, oh, America's on fire. America is fully on fire. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, American politics, American news, American media saturates every other facet of every society that isn't America, especially English language countries. It's so funny. There's such a tier system there. Canadian culture very rarely seeps into Irish media. And say Scottish culture very rarely seeps into Irish media, whereas English culture and American culture we would know all about constantly because that's all the media we consume. Mm-hmm. And then you meet English people or American people sometimes
who aren't aware that Ireland exists, or say Canada has a certain way of doing things, or Scotland or Wales, or like, you know, the Channel Islands, they'd be like, oh, the Channel Islands, is that part of the UK? And you're like, sort of. But anyway, yeah, so if you're listening to this in the future, during this week, a bunch of insurrectionists or seditionists, as the NBCs and MSNBCs and CNNs have been enjoying calling them, invaded the Capitol in the US. A failed coup, but a coup nonetheless, directed by Donald Trump. And it made for fascinating watching, pretty horrifying.
You were also watching it alongside, you're watching this real life coup alongside your rewatch of The West Wing, where they're also invoking the 25th Amendment on President Jeb Bartlett.
They've been talking about invoking the 25th Amendment, and yes, I did specifically watch the episode while that was all happening of Bartlett invoking the 25th Amendment himself, in fairness.
It's actually funny because
different clause of the 25th Amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. But they have they obviously had a lot of stuff been like in the news recently. It's like, so what is the 25th Amendment? It's like, I've watched the whole thing about that already. Been waiting for this for a while. Yeah. But yeah, television, great television, terrible thing in the world. Gripping television to watch. Yeah. So
over Christmas, as we mentioned, we have been doing our Ghibli rewatch. We have continued with it and watched two of my absolute favorite movies over the last week. One of which is Whisper of the Heart, which, if you haven't watched it, it was directed by someone who I don't know the name of, whose name I've forgotten.
But you do know one specific fact about them.
Oh yeah, he basically, this was his first Ghibli movie, and he worked himself to death and died basically after this. He was supposed to take over the whole studio from Miyazaki someday, and can't because he's dead.
Yeah.
But Whisper of the Heart is a beautiful, beautiful movie. It was written by Miyazaki, and it's just stunningly beautiful. It's gentle.
I would wager one of the lesser known to the mainstream audience.
Yeah, very, very lesser known. Very, really beautiful fantasy sequences in it, but mostly slice of life about teenagers trying to. It kind of follows on from the kind of your Kiki, actually specifically from Kiki's Livery Service. But I loved it. I've loved it for years, and it used to be on my number one spot of Ghibli movies, my absolute favorite one, especially because of the musical scene, which was just is beautiful. But I think I'm relinquishing that spot for Mononoke, because that's the other one we watched this weekend. I love Mononoke. I would love it for a long time, but I kind of, in the context of watching every Ghibli movie, it just stands out as an absolute perfection in cinema.
Yeah, and very, very contrasting, because Whisper of the Heart is very as a very overused phrase by me, but like slice of life, kind of pastoral, small, personal, and the fantasy sequences in the film are fully what's the word I'm looking for, metaphorical.
Yeah.
Whereas Princess Mononoke is high fantasy, highly embedded in a mythical period of Japanese history, and laden in a wonderful way with fantastical and mythological themes, which are slightly inaccessible to a Western viewer, as in they rely on a certain innate understanding of things, which is how Western media treats everything they produce. Who, just to take a very broad example, like, you really understand Santa Claus or something like that, or the devil. Exactly.
The devil, constantly represented in Western literature and TV and media. Like, if you're looking at that from an external perspective from a culture which doesn't have excessive and constant references to the devil, or maybe in a religious context doesn't have the concept of the devil, seeing it as it must be so why are they obsessed with this?
Who's this weird little red man?
Can you just imagine that lecture being introduction to the devil?
Yeah. That's what our parents were always afraid we were doing, going to university for a liberal education. But yeah, no, it's Princess Mononoke, not a hot take, incredibly wonderful. Everything I liked about it, Nausicaa Valley, the Wind, is present and in many ways more refined in Princess Mononoke. And once again, looking at it, it's like I've seen this setting in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. I've seen elements of this in The Witcher. I've seen elements of this in so much media that followed it, and obviously Avatar: The Last Airbender and Korra and things like that, bits and pieces.
And specifically in Avatar, the movie, 2009, James Cameron, hugely influenced by Mononoke, and in fact, basically stole the...
Specifically, because I always thought it was Pocahontas, so it was more of a rip-off of...
Very similar context.
Yeah,
but,
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, there you
go. So very, very good. Recommend them. Mononoke, a long one. It's a long watch, I think, for a Ghibli film, but
it is good.
Really wonderful and really like. Well, not that it's inherently a good thing. But violent and adult and mature in its presentation. Yeah,
lots of blood.
Not a kids film, I would argue.
Probably not. But yeah, we watched Ted Lasso, and it feels like a million years ago now since we watched it, but it was really good. And we finished New Girl actually in the meantime, which was really funny.
Yeah, I have nothing to say about New Girl.
No.
At all. We watched it. It was fine. I like some of the actors.
I'm just waiting for the Winston Bishop recut of the whole show where they cut it down to 3 seasons and all they have is the scenes with Bishop in it as the main character and no appearance of Zooey Deschanel.
Yeah, outtake is welcome. I enjoy watching it. It reminds me of that era of television. I'm glad we don't make shows like that anymore. There's
constant fat phobia.
Like I don't know if I mentioned this. I'll mention it very briefly. So I started keeping track, and almost every single episode of New Girl had a fatphobic joke in it. Yeah. Like constant, and like it was shoehorned in. We had a real issue with it, along with various other issues, and the absence of good representation of queer characters or anything like that. But yeah, also like a show that was gestated with the tagline of "She's simply adorkable." I think was maybe poison in the womb a little bit, but.
Ted Lasso, not poison in the womb, actually very, very nice.
Yeah. Speaking of dangerous births.
Oh, okay.
We have an episode that focuses, as you mentioned initially, on the origins of the key and who is the key from one of my more laboured transitions. Also, I wanted to mention on the podcast, because I don't know if you've mentioned this in a while, but it's been drawn to my attention that to highlight that the episode titles for Buffy Boys episodes are actually translations of international titles for the given episode.
Yeah, we've mentioned that a few times.
Yeah, we have, but I wanted to re-up that because maybe you haven't heard that before. Maybe you started listening, but maybe this is your first episode you're ever listening to.
That'd be confusing.
That would be a choice. But yeah, so I like that. I think there's some good ones in there. My all-time favorite, I think, has to be the translation for the body. Which was corpse.
Pretty good.
Yeah, so in this episode, we deal with a few plot progressive themes and teens for anxiety-ridden teenagers. So obviously very plot heavy episode. Something that we will obviously talk a good bit about is the whole Tara situation, but first off maybe talk a bit about Buffy and Dawn, and specifically we're encountering the embedding of certain themes which will carry through the rest of the show on Willow's side, but also in terms of Buffy having to step up at what I think is quite a young age and be the primary caregiver for Dawn and the school, saying to her that if she can't manage to do so and can't manage to get Dawn's relatively mild behavioural problems under wraps, then she will be given to potentially the state or, maybe her father, who they can't find.
I thought that was really bizarre. I mean, like, the American social care system is not that reactive, that they're like, oh, this grieving child has missed some school, we're going to take her away from her only relative. Like
by the end of the week.
I don't think so, but okay.
It could just be a scare tactic, to be fair. Like even Buffy has unreliable narration, if you know what I mean. Like she is scared about this, and she's like saying this is what could happen, but it's probably not actually that likely.
Yeah. No, I think the episode it's a weird one. I think it's generally kind of inept in some ways, but also it has some specific themes going through it. So, caring for people, and that's it. So I mean, like, in the episode you see a couple of different relationships there where you're talking about the kind of issue of tough love, which is the title of the episode. Buffy to Dawn, trying to give her some tough love to get her to step up and act properly. There's the interactions between Willow and Tara, which I think Tara shows Willow a bit of tough love in some ways when they have their argument, and that argument is actually probably the best scene from the episode. I thought it was really interesting. And then obviously you have Ben kind of getting a bit of experience of that as well. The opening of the episode is quite interesting because there's two very contrasting situations. You have Buffy talking to Dawn's principal, who essentially says that Dawn needs to stop being crap, basically, at being at school.
There's exact words, I think.
Well, there's a nice line where Buffy says, "Oh, Dawn, I've been asking you how school's been going, and you said fine, or how school was, and you said fine," and Dawn's like, "Yeah, well, it was fine. I just wasn't there, which is funny. And Buffy says, like, kind of hears that, takes all the information in, and reacts appropriately. She is able to receive the information and try to make something of the fact that she has to change something and figure it out. And then you have Ben, on the other hand, who has a very similar situation to Buffy going on, in the sense that he has
sister problems.
He has an uncontrollable responsibility, if you get me, or like, you know, an alternative life, which he has no control over, and which can call him away from his duties at any time. And he kind of very actively seems to shirk his responsibilities in some ways, or I don't know. Like, I mean,
both Ben and Buffy just want a normal life.
They do. And like, Ben's life doesn't really have a counterpart in, like, metaphorical counterpart in life. But anyway, the show draws very specific comparisons between the two characters. And Ben is in the hospital. He's been missing for 2 weeks because he was being gloried, presumably. And the doctor's just like, oh yeah, you lost your job.
Obviously.
And Ben's like, what? Me lose job for 2 weeks not here?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's someone else's fault.
Yeah, it's awful. But yeah, so it's an interesting one. So I think the tough love of the title is definitely going towards Buffy. You know, I think Buffy has to learn a hard lesson in this one.
Yeah, and buries the seed of, you know, initially she's relying on asking Giles to take the responsibility, which I totally understand why. But he kind of is very firm about the fact that he might be an adult, but she's family, so she has to be able to step up to this. Like, he's pushing her, in some cases physically, out the door to deal with Dawn, but this will lead us eventually in season 6 to Giles leaving, because he feels that his presence actually isn't helpful, and Buffy kind of taking responsibility for that. Yeah,
and I think that's an appropriate thing to do in that situation, in the sense that you can help people, but you can't replace them, if you can't offer to just replace their responsibilities with your body, you know?
Yeah. And
which is what they're asking. She's asking of Giles.
I think Giles is right that Dawn will eventually rebel against him very quickly. You know, if he actually was not a helpful Uncle Watcher, but was actually like telling her to go to school and stuff. Yeah. So it's an interesting one in that respect, and it's a very, like, Buffy has a lot to be dealing with all at once, doesn't she?
Sure does.
When you think about it.
Sure does.
And her main concern being that at any given time, whether Glory is about to find out with the Dawn is the key, or what kind of danger is she in, because obviously Glory could just turn up and rip Dawn in half. Do you know what I mean? Which is the point we get to, or the crisis point we get to, through the lens of what Glory does to Tara in the episode. So as you pointed out, kind of with the crux of the episode, and this episode, despite all that stuff that happens with Dawn, is very much considered a Willow and Tara centric episode. So what do you make of that argument they had, which is ostensibly apparently the first argument they've ever really had as a couple? Yeah,
it's an odd one, because it's two dueling issues combined and mixed into each other. So one of the things is that Tara is communicating that she's afraid that Willow is becoming too powerful too quickly, and it scares her in terms of Willow's ability when it comes to magic. And then the other track of the argument is like Tara being worried that Willow's going to leave her for a man, because this is a temporary stay in Lesbianville during college,
before she heads back to quote unquote Boys Town.
Yes. Which, yeah. So I mean, like, you know, do we consider that to be some internalized homophobia, maybe? Is it a normal communication thing? I think it's an unusual thing to draw comparisons between those two issues here. I think it's an imperfect metaphor, because the issue around Tara's insecurity around Willow wanting to potentially not being fully engaged with Tara is it's insecurity, and it's rooted in Tara's background, which is one of rejection and denying of the self. So you can definitely understand why she feels like that Willow will abandon her, or will change her mind, or that, like, this is a phase essentially to some degree. But the issue around the magic stuff is like, well, she's not saying that, you're going to suddenly stop caring about magic. She's worried that you're too into magic. So yeah, like, it kind of tries to draw comparisons by being so heavily contrasted and intertwined. with each other during the argument, but I don't think it necessarily works.
Yeah, it's the danger of Willow just not committing to one thing and dangerously mixing the boundaries between normal
boy and girl. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, but that was actually the second half of my joke. It was between kind of normal magic and dark magic, and also normal lesbian relationships and discussing, as you would say, bisexual relationships.
Yeah, what did you say? Disgusting?
Yeah.
Okay, got a few. I thought you were saying right. Discussing, and I was like, I would call them disgusting.
You would, yeah. No, I think you're right. I think there's two contrasting issues. I don't feel any, in watching the scene, I don't feel troubled by any of the kind of the positioning of the arguments, because I think really it's not about being gay. It's about, like, the gayness is incidental to being with Tara, and it's that she thinks like Willow will get over being with Tara, who happens to be a lesbian. If you know what I mean, like it's really about that. Willow is a more valuable person who is passing through her life, and that spell as such, pun unintended, will eventually be broken. As I mentioned, and it's a trite thing to say, but I do think it's a weird indictment of the relationship they have and the way it's been presented up until now, that this is the first argument that they have. And it does escalate ungayingly, in terms of, I think Tara is trying to explain, like, Tara's quite reasonable, and she's not an aggressive person. No. She tries to explain herself, and Willow does get quite annoyed quite quickly. So I think Willow's temper and Willow's kind of temperament is a factor in that. I think
as well, and Joel, you can attest to this. Whenever someone in the argument is saying, okay, I feel like I'm putting this badly, give me a second, I'll try to communicate what I'm trying to say, and the other person's like, no, this is what you mean, etc. That the person who's trying to rephrase things and try to communicate what they're trying to say, which is difficult, that person is in the right and is good and whole and nice. Yeah,
no, I absolutely agree. And
you're a bad man.
I really hope that we can take these learnings at some point apply them. If we ever have an argument, I want to be well prepared for it.
I think it's so funny how, like, I mean, people think that, a perfect relationship is one where you've never had an argument. It's like,
I generally find that so bizarre. Yeah,
I know. I a friend a couple of years ago who doesn't talk to me anymore. Actually, it was very odd. Stopped talking to all of our friends. It was really unusual. But
is it because of what you said or what you did?
No.
Okay.
I hope not. But I remember her telling us at one point that, like, she'd been out with her boyfriend for like 6 years or something, and we were like, oh, but you've had arguments. And she's like, no, we've never had an argument. And it's like, how? And they've since broken up. And it's like, how did that happen even?
I've had more disagreements with Booker. Booker punched me in the head the other day. I wasn't happy about it. So yeah, that's our particular position on arguments. The more the better.
Yeah. But I agree. I think Willow's approach here is definitely more immature. I think it's hot-headed. I think it's unusual, because I think Willow is actually a very nuanced and textured character, right? Because she is lovely and quite optimistic and caring, and she has these flaws of being insecure, of being irrational in her fears of I don't know, like, I mean, just self-doubt, uncertainty, kind of going back to being the kind of teenage self again. And when she is faced with them, she overreacts. And that's, like, that's a writing choice. And I think it's good. And I think Alison Hannigan does it very well. And I think appropriately as well, because Willow is quite a nice person. She cools down quite quickly afterwards and figures it out.
Unfortunately, she has just awful cosmic timing, that, like, they have their first argument just before a god tries to kill Tara.
Yeah. And in the worst example of CGI, I would say, so far in this show, Glory does stick her fingers deep into to wiggle around in Tara's brain. And, like, Tara's face is just smush.
It is, yeah.
In the CGI. And I wouldn't mind if it was just an instance, but they reuse that clip in every...
We do see a lot of that, yeah.
In every, previously on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, up until season conclusion, and it just looks like trash.
Yeah. It's a weird thing as well, because it's definitely, obviously, the bait and switch is the audience has made to think that Glory's figured out who the key is and was back a snatch dong.
Yeah.
But yeah, and
then the other bait and switch is that Tara sat down on a park bench in a festival, multicultural festival.
Yeah, mercifully not a Ren fair, but
yeah, true. And she thinks that Willow has come to make up, and she feels him hold her hand, and she's like, oh great. and it's a curly red-haired or person, and it's like, oh no, it's Glory.
Yeah,
you're fucked.
Yeah, but so I definitely think that scene with Glory and Tara, you definitely feel the tension and the danger, like that kind of like, okay, Glory could kill everyone here, like that. That translates well, and that's always a good scene. I do think it's odd that they don't give Tara any lines at all during the interaction. Like, fair enough, she doesn't give Dawn away, that's great, she's in a lot of pain, but she has far more to say in this episode once she becomes brain sucked than she does at any other point. It's an odd one.
I think it would have been a very strong writing point to have her say just something small, anything, in refusing to cooperate with Glory. Like she does refuse to cooperate with Glory. She doesn't tell her who the key is or what's going on, and she's also recognizes that, like, if she calls out for help, that Glory will kill everyone around her. So, like, you can understand the thought process and the decision making there, but she doesn't at any point say anything, which I think could have been a very good character moment of saying, "You're not my type," like, or just that's how I would write it. Yeah, you would. Anything. I'm sure we could come up with a million lines, / maybe one if we thought about it really hard. But it's actually quite an upsetting scene. Tara, Glory's holding her hands. At one point, she like crushes her hand so much that and keeps crushing it. Like returns to crushing it 6 or 7 times across the course of the scene. Yeah. Tara's hand starts bleeding, and it's very clear that Glory crushed her hand so much that the blood pack she was holding in it just went everywhere. Yeah. The blood, which of course then disappears over the course of the scene, in the sense that like it just doesn't appear on the bench after that happens. Could be continuation, could be magic. Well, I was thinking more could be issues around the network not allowing certain amount of blood. Yeah, fair. Anyway, it's quite an effective scene, and then Willow sees this happening and gets trapped behind a big old dragon, so she can't get to Tara to stop it happening. Yeah. Not that she could have done much anyway if she had got there in time. She was just reciting poetry or something. It's always like whenever they do magic, it takes so long. Yeah. You can't just be like, why is it other people can just be like, Tara free him, and that's enough? But she's like, you need a Hecate, hear my pleas, you need a gauntlet of power to do the exactly Tara frames. And then she goes, she's obviously, as you said, she finds the book of darkest magic keys, and sucks it all up, and then goes on a rampage to try and harm Glory. I thought the there's a conversation between Buffy and Willow, where Buffy says, you can't go after Glory, we have to wait, we have to be patient, and Willow's like, oh, but we're just going to wait for her to do something else then. What would you do, Buffy? And Buffy's like, no, you have to wait, blah, blah, blah. And Willow's like, okay. Yeah. And it goes off. Buffy's like, sorting, all fine now. Yeah, I don't have to worry about that situation anymore. And Willow, of course, goes off and attacks Glory. I was just going to say, following on from that, there's a scene with Spike, where Spike is like, so all this happened, and you said this to her, and she just got over it, and he was like, what would it be like if it was you? And then she's like, me do, and then basic empathy. Yeah. What are you talking about? It actually reminds me of the meanest story I tell about my younger brother, who hi Connor, if you're listening. I don't think Connor's ever listened to this, but actually, I shouldn't tell. Oh, I shouldn't. Anyway, we were reading a book when we were very young, like maybe 4 or 5, basically. And my mom was reading a book of short stories, and one of the short stories was a short story called The Chinese Doll. It was a short story collection of Irish short stories called The Lucky Bag or The Lucky Dip or something like that. Anyway, but in this short story, a girl gets a Chinese doll, and she's so happy with it. It's her prized possession, and her family doesn't have much basically. And she shows it to a gardener one day, and the gardener cuts the head off the Chinese doll. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my god, that's so upsetting. And Connor was like, I don't get it. And mom said, Connor, what would you think if someone took your PlayStation memory card and chopped it in half? And he cried for hours afterwards. But it's like, yeah, empathy is difficult sometimes. I should really cut that out, because that sounds like I'm bullying. Connor, if you're listening to this, I really don't want to be bullying. I think it's a funny story, and it's children. Oh, Brian, he's not listening. No, he's not. But Aoife or Kieran might tell him. Aoife and Kieran, don't you rats. I don't co-sign this. I'm the nice one. Yeah. So don't cut off memory cards, kids. That's a message here. Yeah, I know what I mean. Anyway, so Buffy experiences a moment of empathy and rushes to find Tara and Glory. I think it's a very good scene. So Willow comes and finds Glory in her apartment building, because apparently they could find her at any point and they just haven't. So she does some magic to genuinely hurt Glory for the first time, which every Wikipedia notes. But it's a good moment where she uses some magic to basically zap her for a while. Yeah, and that slows her down, but it's not enough, obviously. Yeah, but the fact that, like, as you say, that it actually, if both she manages to fully impede her progress, restrain her to some extent, and cause her genuine pain, it's very much like, if it bleeds, it can be killed. And this stuff does lead to the actual conclusion of the season, a conclusion which I actually still quite like in terms of the plot of it. So, I mean, spoilers, obviously. If you're listening to this podcast, we're very spoilery, and also this show aired 20 years ago minus 3 months. There's another podcast I listen to, which I may have mentioned before, but they have a great policy around spoilers, which I advocate, which is that it's not what happens, but how it happens that's important. Yeah, absolutely. I just don't care about spoilers personally as a person. I know, but I need to hold the middle line here, because some people really do. Yeah, sure. But obviously the fact that Willow then goes on to expand her magic abilities by casting a spell which takes all of the power that Gloria's gotten through the mind sucking to both cure Tara and to seriously weaken Glory in a moment to actually be able to defeat her. It's actually really good. I think it's a really good conclusion. Yeah, it's actually one of the few examples, like usually when they resolve big bags in the show, it's in one big constructive action. Yeah. But like when they defeat Glory, it's a combination of what they learn about Bang, it's a combination of Olaf's Gog Hammer, Troll Hammer, it's that power, it's different things it's been scattered through the season. And as the Wikipedia noted, but I think is accurate, is that Buffy does steadily get better at actually fighting Glory throughout the season. She adjusts and adapts, and that is demonstrated in the finale as well. If you look at the finales to this point, okay, season 1, the Master, she beats him through like the strength of self, essentially, the brilliant move of dying, moving or losing her sense of fear. And season 2, Angel gets defeated by combat, essentially. There's no combat and magic. There is some lead up to it where the Orb of Tesla stuff and the Jenny Calendar's information, but I think that's more of a stalling moment than a kind of a build up. In season 3, you have just explosions, one big explosion. I mean, well done. And season 4, you have like a build up in the sense that Adam has been planning a plot to invade there's always a build up, but essentially there's always like the one thing they do is they rip the heart out of him, but which is quite a direct action. But then in Primeval, I don't think they have necessarily even explored stuff around the first Slayer up to that point. Maybe I'm wrong. Were there inklings of her exploring kind of primeval magic, or I don't think so. Anyway, but yeah, in this season, genuinely you get a lot of slow building plots merging. You know, the mind sucking, the body swapping, the Joel Greyness, the key stuff, the extra additional emphasis on alternate dimensions in this season, like with the troll hammer and stuff like that. And then, and the troll hammer itself, and that all builds up to this point where they actually are able to. And Willow's exploring her magic further, and that all builds up to a really nice crescendo. And what I'll note as well is also a continuing, but a further emphasis on Giles' capacity to do the things that Buffy can't do. Because even in this episode, when they capture one of the minions, Giles intentionally distracts the other Scoobies for a second and clearly breaks the guy's hand. And is very capable of doing the kind of things which needs to be done that they wouldn't do, which obviously is kind of the linchpin of actually defeating Glory in the end. There was quite a popular TikTok going around this week which is about Giles's dark sexiness, and people being like, oh my god, where he like slammed Principal Snyder up against the thing and stuff. I also saw one where people were like, oh my god, no one's ever told me that Giles from Buffy was in this like serial horny coffee ad in the everyone knows that. Everyone knows that. That's why he's from. Maxwell Hayes, wasn't it? Yes. Anyway, but our good friend, the Nescafe. No, it's Maxwell Hayes. Who knows? Our very, very good friend and dear friend of the podcast, Liz, in America, so far away and so unfair.
That's her full name.
She sent that to us as well. Liz can always be relied on to send perfect Buffy TikToks. And if that's not a true lifelong friend, I don't know what is. But yeah, Giles will do it. Okay. So, and then the conclusion of the episode is all of them hiding out in
somewhere.
I think
It's
Xander's
not the
basement.
No, because you can't pull the front off a basement.
Yeah, I suppose so. Well, you can in some places.
Oh, I know Xander's, like, I know Xander's basement. That's not the basement.
Yeah.
It looked like a serial killer's hideout. There was like stuff on the walls and stuff.
There was stuff on the walls, and they have blacked out the curtains and stuff. Anyway, Glory finds them. Who knows how? And they, it's while Tara is like caring for
Or Dawn's caring
Willow.
for
Willow's caring, and Willow and Dawn are caring for Tara. Willow basically communicating her commitment to the relationship in a moment in an episode where that's being questioned and showing like a deep commitment. And as you rightfully pointed out, another great representation of queer people, having one of them afflicted by an illness, a chronic illness, which the other person has to give up their whole life to care for them. Great, as if we didn't have enough of that already. Yeah. Have you ever heard of I was trying to think of a funny thing. Sorry, AIDS.
I've heard of AIDS, yeah. And actually, parallel with the moment, like early in the episode where Buffy is like, no, it's okay, Giles. I don't need to have a life. Dawn is my life now. I am reacting in a measured and normal way to this, yeah. Okay,
anyway, so Glory sees them, and Tara basically outs Dawn in a moment of really deep non-allyship. Key allies are supposed to not out keys to hell gods.
That's the K in LGBTQ is key.
That's super problematic. My favourite's problematic. Remember my favourite's problematic? That Tumblr was wild.
Yeah.
There is a part of it, and I saw a couple of tweets about this recently, and I was like, that shit was bananas. Like, there was one that we always come back to, which was Marie and the Diamonds, which is a British pop musician. She's pretty internationally famous, I think, but there was she has a great song called I'm Not a Robot, where in the music video she dresses up in different things, and it's just like, it's very simple, and it's her singing, and one of them is she's dressed up as the night sky, so she's painted in like actual pitch black 00000 hex code,
deep midnight blue black,
with a bunch of like, stars painted on her. And people were like, this is problematic because it's blackface. And it's like, well, it's literally blackface, but it's not in any way, in any fashion meant to represent black people.
You can discern when you look at something whether something is a caricature of black people or whether it's someone painted black.
Yeah, it was. And you watch the YouTube video. We watched the video on YouTube. It's like, it's very clear that there's no racial connotations to it.
Yeah,
but
she's covered in stars as well. I'm pretty sure.
She's covered in stars. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. So, Tara's problematic, but she outs Dawn to Glory. So Glory now knows that Dawn is a key, and the next episode is the escape. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, Buffy Bits. I have basically none. I couldn't find any interesting factoids about this episode.
Yeah, one of the main things that I found that was pointed out was that the entire premise of the red herring of her sending her minions to monitor Buffy's friends is to find out who the key is.
Has failed twice now.
Seconds after they arrive and are shown to be listening in at Buffy's house, Dawn goes on a rant about a key doesn't need an education. Maybe I just don't need to go to school because I'm the key, so it doesn't matter because I'm not real, and nothing comes of that whatsoever. Because they're obviously like, well, this episode is about to end anyway. Do you know? But it's a really obvious, I think, a plot point. And then otherwise in terms of Buffy Bits, no, I don't think there's anything particular. The fashion, I think, which we'll come to in a second, is probably the only thing of note about the episode.
Yeah, I definitely have some fashion notes as well. So Xander has a haircut. He has much less long hair now.
He's very little to do in this episode, actually.
Yeah, almost nothing. In fact, he's less important than Anya, who says my favourite line of Buffy of all time, which is... well, now that came out a lot more lesbian than it sounded in my head, when she offers Willow to sleep with her so that she won't miss Tara anymore. Yeah,
and it's so sincere. She meant it so kindly.
Oh, it's beautiful. There are actually so many good lines in this episode. So there are things like, we highlighted earlier, head back to Boys Town. I don't feel real multicultural right now. I loved when Willow was asking Tara if she was afraid of the magic, basically, or thinks that, I can't remember if it was magic or lesbian stuff, but Tara responds with SORT of, which I just thought was very nice.
There's also a weird moment where when Glory takes Tara's hand, she's like, oh, you like this sort of thing, don't you? And it's like, I don't know where Glory got this knowledge of Earth from. She's obviously meant to be very earthly or more worldly, but like she doesn't understand gay issues. Do you know what I mean? Or that they aren't like totally normalized. It's such a writer's moment, weird, as opposed to a plot moment.
Yeah. But fashion notes. I thought Target's nice. I thought that the Dawn's costuming continues to be quite good because she's constantly dressed in these kind of aquamarines and blues, which very much represent that kind of virginal purity of medieval literature and of...
She does seem like she'd be up a tower somewhere.
Oh, very much so, yeah. So she's always wearing like ceruleans is what they call it. She's always wearing. She wears a really blue leather jacket in the opening scene where they're talking to the principal, which I thought very much reflected Buffy's traditional red leather jacket, in a kind of a childish, more young-hearted way, but also blue. I thought maybe there was probably some fantasy writing on there because blue often represents mana, magic, or energy. So I think there's that kind of those connotations as well. Though when Tara describes her later on, she does describe her as having a green energy, and I think so did Glory. When Dawn and Glory were in the hospital.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's the kind of the significant. Yeah. And obviously, colours and shades are echoed in the portal that open at the end of the period. The end of the
episode?
Season.
Oh, season. Yeah. As well. Joel, do you have any fashion notes?
Yeah, I would say the one notable thing for me is that when Willow goes to fight Glory, she puts on her big. It's such hubris to do a fashion section. I don't have any of the terminology to describe it, but kind of big plumage like fur jacket or something with a lot of feathers, and it's very iconic to me because that clip of Willow arriving in the door frame I've just seen so many times. So when she put it on, I was like, oh, she's picked up Thor's hammer kind of thing. But she looks a lot like that picture, if you've seen before, of it's like, this turkey looks like it's on its way to a fancy gala dinner, and it's just a turkey with like a big plumage up. It looks like a woman wearing a fur coat. That's all I could think.
I've never seen this, but it sounds great.
I'll send it to you. That was the main one for me. And Claire Kramer looks great throughout as well.
She does, yeah. She rips off her dress at one point because Willow has knifed it to death.
She's like, do you think I care about these clothes? And does a reveal and has a second a shift underneath.
Yeah, no, it's pretty great. And Claire Kramer just, beautiful. Okay, and then death count.
0.
Oh, really?
0 deaths. No deaths in this episode.
Though this is the final appearance of a lot of the
minions, but they're not. So they can be presumed to have been killed by the end of the season. But
Mank and Mork or whatever.
It was literally, I think one was like sploosh. But no, they're not seen to be killed in this episode. Yeah.
Okay, do you have a rating for me, Joel?
Yeah, I would probably give this episode 8 exotic CGI daggers.
Okay, tell me about
it. I enjoyed it. I thought I got a lot of plotting and a lot of interesting points. I enjoy the Dark Willow storyline and some of the focus on, in some ways, like, as much as this is about issues in the relationship, they have seamlessly transitioned to now they're just talking about the fact that they're in a relationship.
Use the word lesbian multiple times in this episode.
Exactly, yeah, which is really nice. I feel the ratcheting tension with Glory, which I think is actually like they do a really good job of maintaining in season 5 that she is a formidable threat.
There's a real sense of doom throughout season 5, which I find very, very
a sense of inevitability, disturbing. Which is like quite like anxiety inducing in a good way.
I'm going to give it 7.5 petrified hamsters out of 10. I liked a lot of it. I thought the discussion around Willow and Tara was great. I thought the comedic moments were actually quite good. I thought there were a lot of very funny moments as well. Gloria at one point says to Willow, "Oh, what do you have there? A bag of tricks?" And Willow says, "Bag of knives," which she delivers awkwardly because she's black-eyed Dark Willow at the time. But it was, I I think it's a well written line.
I'm laughing at it, I'm remembering it now. But yeah.
And just stuff like that. And then Anya is funny throughout. At one point, Anya decides to be patriotic, and she's like, "I love America now."
Yeah. She's like, "I'm not just a human. I'm also an American."
Which I thought was great.
Topical.
Yeah, and I thought it was grand. But I thought it was in some ways. I think this is kind of, for me, a lot of the issues around season 5 is this kind of stuff of plotting towards a conclusion.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I like it. I like all the people in it. I like all the stuff in it. I'm looking forward. I'm so glad that like it's actually only like 2.5 episodes that Tara is not
brain sucked
because it's
the revelation
2021,
yeah, absolutely.
2021 and then half of 22 where towards the end she's back.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, that's actually, it doesn't feel like you've fridged your character.
Yeah, it's a broken arm. Do you know what I mean? Or something. It actually is a plot point as opposed to a fridging.
So I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Okay, and the Cordelia chase.
Yeah, so over on the Cordelia chase we have an episode, Belonging.
Okay.
Interesting episode for what it brings to the angel mythos in huge swakes. A real tone change for the show in some respects. So some significant...
A welcome tone change from my perspective.
A few interesting things happen in this episode. One is that we see... this is the start of a significant and not an inherently negative change for Cordelia's character at this point, where we see that she gets a job on a commercial modeling shoot. Angel goes along. She's been really objectified, very misogynistic director, very, treated very, very badly.
Yeah.
And she's progressively dealing more with these difficult headaches to do with her visions, and it's the last time, it's sad to an extent, the last time she attempts to act, but after this she's very much realizes her calling, whether she intended to be or not, is to help the helpless, and commits herself to that for the rest of her earthly life. So we also see the development, and probably one of the first strongest indications that Angel has stronger feelings for Cordelia, because he's very protective of her throughout that, and is very defensive, to the director, and is kind of trying to find a solution for her headaches, for her visions, which could potentially kill her essentially. But the main plot being that we have Lauren, or the host, who is now being fully introduced as Crev Lauren Swath of the Deathwalk clan, or Lauren for short, and we have a visitor from his home dimension who are also green and pointy like him, but who are warriors who only believe in good and evil, who have no sense of music or anything like that. He's obviously
an aberration,
a poorly veiled gay allegory there, and it shifts.
The character that guy, the friend who comes along, quite good, like quite well spoken, and they give reasonable funny dialogue too, and they build him out a reasonable amount, which is unusual. His
cousin, whose name is totally escaping me now, but cousin warrior man. They really build him out, and it is definitely the introduction of what is a very, I don't know if it's fair to say like a Joss Whedon type character, but like this particular comedic vein of middle of the road fantasy type character, or jocular man with sword, which really defines a lot of the future seasons, I think. That kind of comedy, or that kind of episode of Monster of the Week, rather than something which is dark and in back alleys and private detective like. So we find out a lot more about Lauren. We about his home dimension, and introduce both him into the main cast, but also what precipitates it is a vision that Cordelia has of a woman in a library who it turns out was stolen through a portal 3 years ago, and that is Amy Acker's character Fred, who becomes a main character as well. And on the other side of things, we also have Gunn dealing with the fact that because he wasn't at home with his crew in his neighborhood, one of his lieutenants has died. And I think this is like ends up with him severing a lot of those links. So overall, introduces a lot, ends with a great, one of the better cliffhangers I think in the show, which is they send the Beast back with his cousin, with Lauren's cousin. It all seems fine, and then they find that Cordelia isn't there, and we see a shot of her in a world with 2 suns. So she is touring into the demon dimension, and it's the remaining episodes of the season that take place in Lauren's home dimension, Pylea, and nothing into season 4. So that is the season
3.
Season 3, pardon me. Sorry, Season 3. So this is the end of this season, essentially. So overall, I quite enjoyed it as an episode.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good adventure. The dynamics flow pretty well between everyone.
Yep.
Everyone gets some funny lines. There's a very clear kind of setting and motivation. And for me, a standout thing in this episode, which is an unusual note, but which is played very well, is there's this tension between Wesley ostensibly leading a group and Angel probably being a more natural fit for the leader. And he has a phone call with his off-screen father, who he's excited to tell that he's now being told he's the leader of their group, and his father's obviously quite unsupportive. And he's find
like, when are you going to get fired? And yeah, but that's not going to be for long, is it? And stuff like that.
Yeah, and we do find it implied much later to show that his father was, if not incredibly strict, potentially abusive as well. So it's a really defining part, I think, of his characterization, and I think that Alexis Denisof carries that characterization quite well.
I think these are the final days of Wesley's character like this. You know, this kind of slightly more nebbish, young version of him. I think up until this point, I think he's aged beautifully in the show. I think over the last season of Angel, he's become a much more likable character, much more reasonable, moments of sincerity and darkness. And I think from this point on, I think you see very little of the younger, more unsure or goofy parts of Wesley, and it becomes much more Wes.
Exactly, Wes, 100%. So yeah, overall, everything I enjoyed, I'd probably give this 8 failed feminist gestures.
Yeah, I was going to go for a generous 8 failed feminist gestures as well. It was probably more of a 7.6, but we'll round up.
Yeah, absolutely. So an even keel across Buffy and Angel this week.
Yeah, no, pretty good. Hurtling towards the conclusions of seasons 5 and 2. Yeah.
Great. So I think that's probably us for this week.
Sorry, excuse me, what? Yeah, I'm
going to start that again.
Okay.
So I think that's probably us for this week. So as always, thanks very much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know. It does make our day. Tell your friends and tell your multicultural fair proprietors.
Okay.
And we will see you for Spiral next week on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys. Buffy Boys.
See ya.
Boom, boom, boom. Okay, bye.